When she first entered the music academy, the air itself seemed heavier. The walls were covered with photos of famous pianists, every face smiling with the quiet pride of mastery. The young woman walked slowly, holding her bag close, her footsteps almost silent against the polished floor. She had dreamed of being here once. But now that she was, she wished no one would notice her. The students around her were full of confidence, talking loudly about their performances, their competitions, their teachers. They spoke in a language she understood but didn't belong to, a world of sound, technique, and pride. She quietly found a corner near the old piano and sat, pretending to read through her sheet music. Her first class was tense from the start. The main instructor, known for his strict methods, stood tall in front of the students. He scanned the room with sharp eyes, demanding attention without saying a word. "In this academy," he finally said, "we don't play for fun. We play to master. We play to live." His tone carried both challenge and warning. One by one, students were called to the piano to play a short passage. The teacher listened closely, correcting every mistake with a tap of his pen on the desk. When someone did well, he nodded slightly. When they didn't, his silence spoke louder than words. The young woman kept her head down, hoping her name wouldn't be called. She had played piano her whole life, but not like this, not under these lights with people watching, judging every note. She loved music, but she didn't love being seen. "Next," the teacher said suddenly, scanning his list. His eyes lifted, stopping right on her. Your turn." Every head in the room turned toward her. She froze, her breath caught halfway. She wanted to say she wasn't ready, that she needed more time, but no words came out. The teacher frowned slightly. "Are you waiting for an invitation?" Slowly, she stood and walked to the piano. Her fingers brushed against the cool wood of the instrument as she sat down. The keys stared back like 100 tiny mirrors, reflecting her uncertainty. "What will you play?" the teacher asked. She whispered the name of a simple piece. The teacher's eyebrows rose. "That's a beginner's song," he said, shaking his head. "You've been here 3 weeks and this is what you choose?" Her lips parted, but she couldn't find the courage to explain. She wasn't afraid of the music, she was afraid of the people listening. The teacher sighed, his voice cold. "If you're going to waste time, then maybe you shouldn't be here. You must prove yourself, not hide." He looked around the class, then back at her. "Play something that shows skill, something real. Play the Rachmaninoff Prelude in C-sharp minor." The room went silent. A few students looked at each other, eyes wide. Even the confident ones seemed uneasy. That piece was known for its intensity and power, something only advanced players dared to try. The young woman froze. She knew the song. She had practiced it once, years ago, in a small house where no one watched, where music was a secret language between her and the world. But here, in this room filled with judgment, it felt impossible. The teacher crossed his arms. "Play," he said simply. Her hands trembled as she placed her fingers on the keys. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than any note she could play. She took a deep breath and pressed the first chord. The sound came out uneven, too soft. A few students smirked. Her eyes lowered. She pressed another note, then another, trying to find the rhythm she once knew so well. But the pressure was crushing. Every mistake felt like a spotlight. The teacher sighed loudly, his disappointment echoing in the room. "Stop," he said. "If this is all you can do, you might consider another path." She looked down, feeling the burn of shame rise in her throat. The teacher turned to the class. "This is what happens when you come here without dedication. Music is not for the timid." She wanted to disappear. Her chest ached. But she forced herself to stay seated for a moment longer. She placed her fingers back on the keys. Not because he told her to, but because something inside her refused to end like this. She whispered quietly, "One more try." The teacher raised an eyebrow. "You've had your chance," but she didn't wait for permission. Her fingers pressed down again, this time with a steady touch. The sound was different, deeper, smoother. The notes began to flow, not perfectly, but with something real behind them. Her eyes closed, shutting out the faces, the stares, the judgment. The melody grew stronger, carrying her away from the classroom. In her mind, she wasn't here anymore. She was back home, sitting beside her mother, listening to her hum the tune softly. She remembered the smell of tea, the sound of rain outside the window, and her mother's voice saying, "Play like you mean it. Don't just press the keys. Tell your story." Her fingers moved faster, confident now. The song's stormy chords filled the room, echoing off the high walls. The class fell silent. Even the teacher stopped moving. He watched, his stern expression slowly changing to surprise. The young woman's playing was no longer technical. It was emotional, alive. Every note carried a piece of her. She wasn't performing anymore. She was speaking through music in a language that everyone suddenly understood. When the final note faded, there was silence, a deep, heavy silence. She sat there, breathing hard, her hands still hovering above the keys. The teacher opened his mouth but said nothing. The students looked stunned. No one clapped, not out of disrespect, but because they were too moved to react. Finally, she stood, gathering her music sheets, and walked back to her seat quietly. The teacher followed her with his eyes. There was something new in his gaze now, a mix of confusion and respect. He cleared his throat and said softly, "Class dismissed." As the students left, some glanced back at her. No one dared to laugh or whisper this time. A few looked thoughtful, as if they had just witnessed something they didn't quite understand. The young woman stayed behind, waiting for the room to empty. She sat at the piano again, alone this time. The lights were dimmer, the world quieter. She placed her fingers on the keys and played a soft melody. Not the difficult one, not something grand. Just a gentle tune that reminded her why she had started playing in the first place. For years, music had been her way to speak when she couldn't find words. It had carried her through loss, through silence, through days when everything felt too heavy. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that. She had started believing that music was about skill, about proving something. Now in this empty room, she remembered it wasn't. It was about feeling. About truth. The door opened quietly. The teacher stood there, his expression softer than before. He watched her play for a moment, then said quietly, "That was unexpected." She stopped and turned slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." He raised a hand. "Don't apologize. That was the first time I heard someone play that piece with real emotion in a long time." She didn't know what to say. The teacher nodded slowly, almost to himself. "Tomorrow, come early. I want you to play again. We'll start from the beginning." She looked surprised, unsure if he was serious. He gave a small smile, not a warm one, but genuine. "You've got something rare. Don't hide it." Then he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. She sat still for a long moment, listening to the faint echo of her last note. A small smile appeared on her face, and the first one in a while. She touched the piano once more, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting in puddles from the afternoon rain, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just the shy girl in the corner anymore. She had found a part of herself she thought she'd lost. The fear was still there. Yes, but underneath it was something stronger. A quiet fire, waiting to grow. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she looked forward to finding out. The next morning, the young woman arrived early, just as the teacher had asked. The hallways were quiet, filled only with the faint hum of cleaning machines and the soft echo of distant footsteps. She walked into the piano room, the same one that had made her heart race the day before, but this time it felt different. The sunlight came in through the tall windows, falling across the piano keys like a soft invitation. She sat down slowly, running her fingers over the smooth surface. She didn't play right away. She just sat there, taking in the silence. After a few minutes, the door opened. The teacher stepped in, holding a small notebook and a cup of coffee. His sharp expression was still there, but something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't looking at her like a student anymore. He was looking at her like a mystery he wanted to understand. "You're early," he said, his voice calm. "You told me to come early," she replied quietly. He nodded, placing the notebook on the piano. "Good. That means you listen." She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled faintly. "Let's begin," he said. "Play what you played yesterday." The same piece. Her fingers found the keys again. She took a deep breath and began to play. The music flowed smoother this time. Her hands moved naturally, as if the piano was breathing with her. She didn't look at him. She just played, letting the music fill the empty room. When she finished, the teacher didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said softly, "You play like someone who understands pain." but also like someone who refuses to give up. She looked at him a little surprised. No one had ever described her music that way before. He walked around the piano, stopping beside her. Most students here play notes, he continued. They follow the sheet. They count beats, but they don't feel. You, on the other hand, you play live. She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from him. The teacher sat in a nearby chair, watching her carefully. Tell me something, he said after a pause. Who taught you to play like that? She hesitated, her eyes lowering to the piano. My mother, she said softly. She used to play every evening. I learned by watching her. He nodded slowly. And she was a professional? She was, the young woman said. She played at concerts. But she got sick. She couldn't play anymore, so she taught me instead. The teacher's expression softened. He didn't press further. You learned emotion before technique, he said. That's rare. For the next hour they practiced together. He gave small correction. Where to pause, where to breathe between phrases, how to let one note fade before the next began. She followed quietly, listening carefully to every word. When they finished, he leaned back and sighed. You have natural skill, he said. But you also carry something heavy when you play. It's powerful, but it could also destroy you if you're not careful. She looked at him, puzzled. Destroy me? He nodded. Music can heal. But when you pour all your pain into it, you risk breaking yourself in the process. Learn to balance emotion with control. Otherwise, you'll burn out before you truly shine. His words stayed in her mind for the rest of the day. Over the next few weeks, her routine changed completely. She was no longer invisible in class. Every time she entered the room, people noticed. Some of them smiled at her now. Others still watched in silence, unsure how to treat her. The teacher often used her as an example when explaining a technique. Watch how she moves her hands, he would say. She lets the sound breathe. She didn't like being the center of attention, but she couldn't deny the warmth that came with recognition. It felt strange after so long being unseen. Still, she worked harder than ever. Every morning before class, she practiced alone. Every night before bed, she reviewed what she'd learned. Music became her world again, not a burden, but a voice she was finally learning to trust. One afternoon, the academy announced that they would hold a midterm performance. Each student would have to play a selected piece in front of the teachers and classmates. It wasn't a public concert, but it was serious. The teachers would evaluate everyone's progress. When her name appeared on the list, she froze. Her assigned piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. It was another difficult one, fast, demanding, filled with emotion and precision. She went straight to the practice room, opened the sheet, and stared at the pages of dense notes. It looked impossible. The teacher walked in soon after, noticing the look on her face. You think it's too hard? He asked. She hesitated. It's a lot, he smiled faintly. Good. If it doesn't scare you, it's not worth playing. She looked up at him, a little unsure. But what if I can't do it? He placed a hand on the piano lid. Then you'll learn trying. That night she stayed late, playing the same few bars over and over again until her fingers ached. The janitor peeked in once and shook his head, saying she'd miss the last bus if she didn't leave soon. But she stayed a bit longer, determined to get it right. Every mistake frustrated her, but she didn't give up. She remembered her mother's words again. Don't play for perfection. Play for meaning. So she kept going, one line at a time. Days turned into weeks. Her classmates began to notice her dedication. Some admired her quietly. Others whispered that she was the teacher's favorite. She ignored it all. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing to find her own voice again. One day, as she practiced, another student approached her. He was tall, quiet, and known to be one of the best in the class. You're playing that piece? He asked, watching her hands move. She nodded. It's not easy, he said. I tried it last year. Gave up halfway, she smiled faintly. Then I'll try not to give up. He chuckled softly. You won't, I can tell. Then he added, when you play, the room feels different. It's like the piano listens to you. She looked at him, a little surprised by his words. The piano listens? He shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe you just make people listen. After he left, she thought about that for a long time. Maybe music wasn't just about notes. Maybe it was about connection, about being heard without speaking. The night before the performance, she barely slept. She kept hearing the melody in her mind over and over. She sat up, whispering the rhythm under her breath. Her hands moved in the air as if pressing invisible keys. Morning came too fast. Her stomach felt tight as she walked to the hall. The stage lights were bright, and the audience, and mostly students and teachers, filled the seats. The teacher gave her a small nod from the front row. Her name was called. She walked to the piano, every step echoing through the room. She sat down, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She could hear her heartbeat louder than anything else. For a moment she thought about standing up and walking away. But then she remembered all the hours she had practiced, all the nights she had stayed behind. She took a deep breath and began. The first notes were quick, like raindrops against glass. Her fingers moved fast, steady, confident. The melody rose and fell, full of motion and feeling. She wasn't just playing, she was speaking through sound, telling a story only she could tell. The audience leaned forward. The teacher watched with quiet pride. Halfway through, she made a small mistake. One wrong note. Her heart skipped, panic rising. But she didn't stop. She kept playing, turning the mistake into part of the music. She smiled slightly, realizing it didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be real. When she reached the final section, her whole body moved with the rhythm. Her hair brushed across her face, her hands gliding over the keys like they belonged there. The last note rang out clear and strong, hanging in the air before fading away. The hall went silent for a heartbeat, then filled with applause. She sat there breathless, trying to understand what just happened. She looked toward the teacher. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said everything without words. As she walked off the stage, she felt light, like the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. For the first time, she didn't feel like a student trying to prove herself. She felt like a musician, someone who had something worth saying. After the performance, the young woman sat backstage, still trembling a little. Her hands were warm from playing, but her heart felt strangely calm. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about what people thought of her. She was thinking about the music, about how it had felt to lose herself in it completely. Her classmates came to her one by one. Some smiled, others gave quick compliments. "That was amazing," one said softly. "You made it look easy." She thanked them, though she didn't quite believe it. She knew how much effort it had taken, how many nights she'd spent chasing those notes until they finally made sense. When most of the students had left, her teacher approached. He didn't speak right away. He just stood near the piano, looking at her quietly. Then he said, "You didn't just play well today. You told a story." She looked down, unsure what to say. "I just tried to play how I felt." He nodded slowly. "That's what makes the difference. People don't remember perfection. They remember honesty." She smiled faintly. "I made a few mistakes." He shook his head. "Yes, and every one of them sounded alive." That night, as she walked home, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. The cool air brushed against her face, carrying the faint sound of music from a nearby cafe. She stopped for a moment, listening. Someone was playing a slow tune, gentle and thoughtful. It made her smile. When she reached home, she set her bag down and sat near the small upright piano in her living room. It wasn't fancy, and some keys were slightly out of tune, but it was hers. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the same piece she had performed earlier, only softer, slower. The sound filled the quiet apartment, wrapping around her like an old memory. Halfway through, she stopped. Her eyes wandered to a framed photograph on the shelf. Her mother, sitting at a piano, smiling warmly. She remembered that day clearly. It had been raining outside, and she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. Her mother had let her sit on her lap while playing a gentle lullaby. "Music doesn't come from your hands," her mother had said, tapping her chest gently. "It comes from here. If you don't feel it, no one else will." Her eyes softened. She missed her mother more than she could ever put into words. It had been years since she passed away, but the silence she left behind still filled the room. Music had been their language, their way of speaking without needing words. For a long time after her mother's death, she couldn't play at all. Every time she touched the keys, the pain felt too fresh, like reopening an old wound. But now, after everything, she could finally feel her mother's presence again. Not as sadness, but as warmth. She whispered quietly, "I hope you heard me today." The next morning, she arrived at the academy early again. The halls buzzed with talk about the performances. Some students discussed mistakes, others bragged about praise. But whenever someone mentioned her name, it was different. They spoke with quiet respect now. She didn't let it go to her head. She knew how fragile progress could be. One wrong note, one bad day, and all the confidence could vanish again. When she entered the piano room, her teacher was already there, tuning one of the instruments. He looked up and smiled slightly. "You seem lighter today," she shrugged. "Maybe a little. You should be," he said. "You did something special." He motioned toward the piano. "Come, play something, anything you want." She sat down and began to play a soft melody, one her mother used to hum when she was cooking. It wasn't written anywhere. It was just something that lived in her memory. The teacher listened quietly, his eyes thoughtful. When she finished, he said, "That wasn't from a book, was it?" She shook her head. "No, my mother made it up. I just remember it," he smiled faintly. "That's what true musicians do. They remember songs that no one else ever wrote down." He paused, then added, "You know, when I first saw you, I thought you didn't care. You seemed distant. But I was wrong. You cared too much. That's why you hid." She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't want to be noticed," he nodded. "Because you were afraid of failing." She hesitated. "Maybe." He leaned back against the piano. "Let me tell you something. Every great artist I've met was afraid. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid of not being understood. But they still played. They still showed up." She thought about that. Maybe fear wasn't something to escape. Maybe it was part of the process. As the days passed, her relationship with the teacher grew more comfortable. He still pushed her, but it felt different now. There was respect between them. Sometimes he would tell stories about his own struggles. The time he froze during a concert, or when he spent a year doubting whether he was good enough to teach at all. Those moments made her realize he wasn't just strict. He was human too. One afternoon, while she was practicing alone, one of the older teachers stopped by. She was known for being quiet but observant, the kind who noticed everything. She listened to a few minutes of playing, then said gently, "Your music has sadness in it, but it also has healing." The young woman smiled softly. "It used to only have sadness," the older teacher nodded. "Then you're growing." She paused before adding, "Your mother must have been proud of you." Her eyes softened again. "She was the reason I started playing." The older woman gave her a kind smile. "Then she's still with you?" "Every note you play carries her forward." Those words stayed with her. One evening, after class, she was walking out when she saw a little girl in the hallway, sitting near the door, holding a small keyboard. She looked lost. The young woman walked over and asked gently, "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl nodded. "My brother's in class." "I'm bored," she smiled. "Do you play?" The girl shrugged. "A little." The young woman sat beside her and said, "Show me." The girl pressed a few awkward notes, then frowned. "It doesn't sound right." "Try again," the young woman said. "But this time don't think about the notes. Just think about how it feels." The girl looked puzzled, but tried again. This time the melody sounded smoother. The young woman clapped softly. "See? It's not about being perfect. It's about feeling it." The girl grinned shyly. "You sound like my music teacher." She laughed. "Maybe that's a good thing." The girl's brother arrived soon after, and they left, but that small moment stayed in her mind. She realized how good it felt to share what she had learned. Not just to play, but to help someone else believe in themselves. Weeks later, the Academy announced the final concert of the semester. This one would be open to families, friends, and local guests. It was a big deal, the kind of event that could lead to scholarships or opportunities. When the list of performers went up, her name was at the top again. She would close the evening with the same Rachmaninoff piece that had once terrified her. The night before the concert, she sat at her piano at home. The same photograph of her mother was there beside her. She placed it carefully on the music stand right next to the sheet. "I'm not scared this time," she whispered. "I just want to make you proud." She played the first few lines, and the music came alive, filled with warmth and strength. Every chord carried a piece of her journey, the fear, the mistakes, the courage to begin again. When she finished, she didn't cry. She just smiled. Because for the first time, she didn't feel like she was playing alone. The day of the concert arrived quickly, and the young woman felt a mixture of excitement and calm she had never experienced before. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple outfit that made her feel both comfortable and confident. Her mother's photograph rested in her bag, tucked safely, a small reminder of why she had started playing in the first place. The academy was buzzing with activity. Students rushed through the hallways, tuning instruments, practicing last-minute notes, and checking their music sheets. Families and guests were beginning to arrive, filling the auditorium with chatter and soft laughter. She moved quietly through it all, focusing on the piano waiting for her on stage. Her classmates greeted her warmly, some offering encouraging words, others giving small nods of respect. A few of the same students who had once whispered and laughed at her now looked at her differently. There was a sense of curiosity in their eyes, as if they were watching someone unfold a story they didn't fully understand yet. The teacher, who had once doubted her, approached with his usual calm presence. "You're ready," he said simply. "Remember, play for yourself. Not for me, not for them. Play for the music." She nodded, taking a deep breath. Those words had become a mantra over the past few weeks. Play for the music. Forget everything else. Backstage, she waited her turn. Other students performed, each bringing their own talent and style to the stage. Some played beautifully, others struggled under the pressure, but each performance reminded her how far she had come. She had once been terrified of making a single mistake, and now she was here ready to close the entire concert. When her name was called, she walked to the stage. The lights were brighter than she expected, and the hall felt enormous. Families, teachers, and friends sat in rows waiting. Her heart beat steadily, a calm rhythm she had learned to trust. She could feel the energy of the room, but it didn't scare her anymore. It energized her. She sat at the piano, adjusting the bench carefully. The audience quieted down, the last whispers fading into silence. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar coolness beneath them. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music rise in her mind before her hands moved. The first notes were soft, but confident. They carried the story of her journey, the fear, the mistakes, the small victories, and the courage to continue. As she played, her fingers moved with precision, but more importantly, with feeling. She didn't just press the keys. She made them sing, breathe, and resonate. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward, mesmerized by the flow of the music. Others had tears in their eyes, moved not just by the technical skill, but by the honesty of her performance. It was impossible to look away. She had transformed the piano into a voice, one that spoke without words but communicated everything she had carried inside. Halfway through the piece, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. A difficult passage approached, one she had stumbled over many times during practice. Her hands hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but she remembered her mother's words. "Don't play for perfection. Play for meaning." That was all she needed. Her fingers moved forward confidently, transforming the tension into energy. The notes rang out with clarity, carrying both strength and emotion. Every chord, every transition flowed naturally, like water moving over smooth stones. The room was alive with her music. When the final note faded, there was a brief pause. Silence hung in the air, heavy and expectant. Then the hall erupted in applause. It wasn't polite or measured, it was loud, heartfelt, and full of awe. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, moved by the performance they had just witnessed. The teacher walked onto the stage, giving a small nod of approval. He didn't say much. His eyes said everything. There was pride there, tempered with the understanding of what it had taken for her to reach this moment. As she stood, her legs shaky but her spirit soaring, her classmates surrounded her. They congratulated her, not with envy, but with admiration. A few even asked her questions about how she approached the piece. Eager to learn from her, she answered simply, sharing a little of her process, but without boasting. She wanted to inspire, not intimidate. Later, as the audience filtered out and the hall quieted, the teacher approached her privately. "You've grown," he said softly, "not just as a pianist, but as a person. Today, you didn't just perform. You showed courage, patience, and truth. That's what makes someone unforgettable." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just about the applause or the recognition. It was about proving to herself that she could face fear and succeed, that she could turn her pain and doubt into something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, her reputation within the academy transformed. Students who had once ignored her or whispered behind her back now sought her guidance. She didn't become arrogant or distant. She shared her knowledge generously, helping others find their own voices. She realized that music was more than personal expression. It was connection, a way to reach people in a way words could not. Her teacher began to trust her with more challenging pieces. He encouraged her to experiment, to explore music beyond the notes, to take risks. She approached every lesson with focus, but also with joy. The fear that had once gripped her was now a distant memory, replaced by a quiet confidence she could rely on. One afternoon, the teacher gathered a few students for a small recital in the practice room. He asked her to perform a difficult composition, more advanced than anything she had played before. The students watched eagerly, curious to see if she could rise to the challenge once again. She approached the piano, her hands steady. The piece was complex, demanding both speed and emotion. She began to play, feeling every note in her chest and letting it flow through her fingers. The other students watched in silence, amazed at her control, her expression, and the way she made the music come alive. When she finished, the room erupted in applause again. One of the older students said quietly, "I've never heard anything like that." She simply smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about being the best in the room anymore. It was about growth, about feeling alive through music. The teacher came over, nodding slowly. "You've learned more in these past months than most students learn in years. But remember, growth never ends. There's always more to explore, more to feel, more to express. Don't ever stop seeking it." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. Music wasn't just about performing or being recognized. It was about lifelong learning, about discovering new ways to connect with the world and with herself. In the following days, she began to notice changes not just in others' perception of her, but in how she saw herself. She no longer felt the need to hide in corners or stay silent. She spoke up in class, shared ideas, and offered help where she could. She realized that confidence wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about trusting herself and her abilities. Her classmates, once distant or judgmental, began to warm up to her naturally. Some asked her to play duets with them. Others asked for advice on technique. She welcomed them, happy to share her experience without feeling superior. Music had taught her humility as much as courage. One evening, after another long day of practice, she sat alone at the piano. The room was quiet, the sun setting through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the keys. She thought about how far she had come, about the fear and doubt she had felt in the beginning, and she realized that every challenge, every mistake had brought her to this point. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers move freely over the keys. The notes flowed like a gentle stream, carrying all her emotions: gratitude, longing, joy, and a quiet sense of purpose. She didn't think about anyone listening. She didn't think about being perfect. She just played, for herself and for the memory of her mother who had started her on this journey. When the final note faded, she leaned back and smiled. She felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Music was no longer just a skill or a goal. It was a part of her, a voice she could always return to. And in that moment, she knew something else. She wasn't just a student, a performer, or someone who had once been invisible. She was a musician, a storyteller, and someone who had found her own strength and identity through the keys of a piano. She had faced fear, doubt, and silence. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace her emotions, and to share her gift with the world. And in doing so, she had discovered a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Courage, passion, and honesty in your heart can transform even the quietest voice into one that is unforgettable. The day of the grand concert finally arrived. It was the Academy's biggest event of the year, one that drew not just students and teachers, but families, friends, and even members of the local community. The young woman had performed before, but nothing compared to the anticipation in the air now. The auditorium was enormous, with high ceilings, velvet curtains, and polished wooden floors that reflected every movement and sound. Backstage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. Her heart beat fast, but it was different from the fear she had once felt. This time it was energy, excitement, and a quiet determination. She adjusted her dress, smoothed her hair, and placed the small photograph of her mother on the piano. It had become a tradition, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. Her classmates were performing one by one. Each piece carried its own weight, some full of technical brilliance, others filled with emotion. She watched them quietly, feeling pride for them and a quiet thrill for herself. She knew that tonight she would close the concert. She would play the piece that had once terrified her, the Rachmaninoff Prelude in C-sharp minor, and she would finally show the world, and herself, just how far she had come. When her name was announced, the applause was polite but filled with curiosity. She walked to the piano, her steps steady. The lights were bright, and the audience's eyes seemed to follow her every move. She felt a moment of hesitation, but then she remembered her teacher's words. Play for the music. Not for them, not for me. Play for yourself. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. Her hands hovered over the keys. For a moment, everything felt still. Then she began. The first notes were deliberate, clear, and confident. Each chord rang out, carrying a mixture of intensity and emotion. Her fingers moved with purpose, her wrists flowing naturally, her arms bending and stretching as if the music itself were alive. She didn't just play the notes. She told a story, one that had been building for years, the story of her fear, her loss, her courage, and her growth. The audience leaned forward, silent and captivated. Parents whispered softly to each other. Students watched with wide eyes, and even the teachers seemed entranced. Her music filled the room, echoing against the walls, moving through every corner. Every passage, every delicate touch of the keys spoke with honesty and power. Halfway through, the piece grew stormy. Fast, complex sequences of notes required precision and speed. She could feel the old nervousness creeping in for a moment, but she didn't fight it. She welcomed it. She let it fuel her fingers, her mind, her heart. Mistakes that would have once paralyzed her were now just part of the performance. Opportunities to deepen the emotion, to make the music real. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, alone at home under the soft light of her room, imagining this very moment. She remembered her mother's voice guiding her, saying, "Play with your heart. Let it speak." She felt that voice now, steady and strong, and it gave her courage. The middle section of the piece was the most demanding, filled with leaps, rapid sequences, and dramatic pauses. She allowed herself to fully inhabit the music, to let it move her as much as she moved it. Her entire body became part of the sound, her breathing synchronized with the rhythm, her heartbeat matching the crescendos. The audience was spellbound. Some held their breath as the notes raced forward. Others closed their eyes, feeling the intensity and the vulnerability she put into every chord. It was as if the piano had become a living being, and she were its voice. When the final section approached, a slow, lingering melody that allowed for reflection, she softened her touch. The storm of emotion calmed, replaced with warmth and tenderness. Every note was deliberate, each one a tribute to her journey. The audience could feel the transformation. The shy, timid student who had once feared playing in front of anyone had grown into a musician capable of moving hearts. The last note rang out, clear and resonant. It lingered in the air, vibrating against the walls, filling the room with its final echo. Silence followed. A long, profound silence, as if the audience collectively held their breath, savoring the moment before reality returned. Then the applause began. Soft at first, then swelling into a thunderous wave. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some even whistling in astonishment. The sound was overwhelming, and for a moment she just sat there absorbing it. Her hands hovered above the keys, reluctant to leave them, unwilling to break the magic of the moment. Her teacher stepped onto the stage, clapping slowly at first, then with more intensity. His usual stern expression had softened, and pride shone in his eyes. He didn't need words. His smile and applause said everything. Her classmates surrounded her after she rose, some beaming, others silent with awe. "That was unbelievable," one said quietly. "I've never heard anyone play like that." Another whispered, "You made the piano sing, really sing." She smiled, her chest swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't feel like the center of attention. She felt connected, to the music, to her mother's memory, to everyone who had watched her grow. Later, in the quiet backstage, the teacher approached her again. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked softly. She shook her head, unsure. "You didn't just play a piece of music," he said. "You shared a part of yourself. That's rare, very rare. People will remember this performance. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Because it was you." She nodded, her eyes misty. I just wanted to play for her, she said, pointing to the photograph of her mother on the piano. The teacher's eyes softened. Then you did exactly what you needed to do. In the days that followed, the impact of her performance became clear. Teachers spoke of her as a musician with a rare gift, one who could combine skill, emotion, and storytelling. Students who had once been distant or dismissive now sought her advice, asking for guidance on technique, expression, and even stage presence. She shared her experiences generously, helping them see that music was not just about notes but about feeling and connection. She began to notice a change in herself as well. The fear that had once held her back had diminished, replaced with quiet confidence. She could play challenging pieces without hesitation, perform in front of an audience without trembling, and most importantly, she trusted her own abilities. Music was no longer something to fear. It was a space where she could be herself fully and honestly. Her teacher continued to challenge her, introducing more complex compositions and encouraging her to experiment with her style. She embraced every challenge, knowing that growth was ongoing and that there was always something new to discover in music. Each performance became an opportunity to explore, to feel, and to connect with others. One afternoon, as she practiced alone in the empty auditorium, she paused and looked around. The space that had once felt intimidating now felt like home. She could imagine future concerts, new pieces, and the faces of people moved by her music. It was no longer about proving herself. It was about sharing her gift, expressing her story, and touching the hearts of others. She played a soft melody, one she had composed herself, inspired by her mother and the journey she had taken. The notes were delicate and expressive, carrying her emotions across the empty room. For the first time, she felt truly free to play, to feel, and to be heard. When she finished, she closed her eyes and smiled. Music had brought her back to life, had given her courage, and had connected her to the world in a way nothing else could. She knew the path ahead would still have challenges, mistakes, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had discovered something far more important: the power to trust herself, the courage to face fear, and the ability to transform her emotions into something beautiful. And as she left the auditorium that evening, the sun setting behind the building, she felt a quiet certainty. She was no longer the shy, timid girl who had once hidden in the corner. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a young woman who had found her own voice through the piano. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were wonderful. But what mattered most was the music itself, the notes, the melody, and the story she had told. That story, born from fear, shaped by practice, and colored by her own heart, would stay with her forever. And she knew, deep down, that no matter what happened next, she would always play with courage, honesty, and love. The piano would always be there, the music would always flow, and she would always have a voice that could speak, heal, and inspire. Because she had learned the most important lesson of all: the greatest music comes not from perfection, but from truth.